What's going on, everyone? Today I'm going to be giving you my non-spoiler review for Black Phone 2. This was by far one of my most anticipated horror movies of this year, probably one of my most anticipated movies in general, especially after seeing the trailer for it. Before that, I was definitely excited, but I always thought to myself, what could they possibly do for a sequel to The Black Phone, especially given how that first film ended? But once I saw that first trailer, which I did a reaction to on this channel, I was hooked because I saw what they were trying to do, I saw what they were taking inspiration from, and I was thrilled for it. And so now that we have it, this is going to be my full review. Let's talk about the positives, then we'll get to the negatives, and then we'll give it a rating out of 10. So starting off with the positives, obviously the first thing I have to talk about here is the very overt, very obvious A Nightmare on Elm Street Freddy Krueger inspiration that this film took. Now, some people are going to call it a ripoff. Some people are going to say, oh, it's just a complete copy of that movie, or at least that concept. And I'm not going to go that far and say that, because I don't think it's exactly the same. But yes, clearly this movie is taking heavy inspiration. In a lot of ways, it feels like Scott Derrickson wanted to make a Nightmare on Elm Street reboot, and maybe he wasn't able to. Maybe he wasn't able to convince the people who have the rights to it to like actually make that movie. So he just said, you know what? I'm going to make a sequel to The Black Phone and turn it into a Nightmare on Elm Street reboot type film. And he kind of succeeded with that. And I'm a huge fan of Freddy Krueger. I mean, I'm even wearing him right now. I had to do it for the video because he's one of my favorite slasher characters. As a whole, Nightmare on Elm Street is definitely one of my favorite horror franchises. I love the concept of dreams, and so a horror film centered around dreams is always going to interest me. There's just so much creativity behind that, so many interesting things you can do, and of course it sucks that we haven't had a new Nightmare on Elm Street movie for over 15 years, and the one that we got 15 years ago wasn't even really that good. So it's been a while since we've had a really good Nightmare on Elm Street film, and I'm totally fine with a director coming out and just making his own version of that. I mean, even Stranger Things a few years ago with season 4 was basically doing that with the whole Vecna character. It also is definitely taking inspiration from Freddy Krueger. So like I said, I'm completely fine with it. I don't consider this a ripoff or, you know, being derivative of that idea, because I think it's a really interesting idea that should be explored more. So I'm glad this movie did it. And I gotta tell you, the way they explore it, holy shit, it was incredible. I think this is one of the coolest visualizations of dreams I have ever seen in a horror movie, or just even movie in general. The way they do it is that every single dream sequence is shot on a Super 8 camera, that like old film style look. And obviously it's meant to give off kind of like a creepy feel. That's definitely the purpose of it. If you've seen the movie Sinister, also directed by Scott Derrickson, there's a lot of scenes with that look as well. And they were clearly trying to do that here in this movie because, like I said, it just makes things feel more creepy, and it really, really worked. But another element that I loved about it is that look also gives off a nostalgic memory type feel, because usually when people are looking at tapes like that, they're looking at, you know, home video tapes and like, you know, memories of their childhood. That's usually what that's associated with. And in a lot of ways, dreams are an amalgamation of memories, so it kind of makes sense that your dreams would also have that look. And so visualizing it that way is incredibly interesting, and like I said, it makes the scenes so much cooler. The movie as a whole is incredibly directed, so many great camera shots. There was not a single second of this movie that felt uninteresting when it comes to how it was directed. I think Scott Derrickson is very great at that. It was definitely the case in the first Black Phone film, and it's definitely the case here. Every single shot is just great. Everything looks well done, technically speaking. Like if we're talking the special effects or the sound design or really any of that, it's all impeccable in this film. I really didn't have a single issue there. And when it comes to the horror itself, I wouldn't say it's filled with jump scares. There is a few jump scares that definitely got me, but I'm not against a few jump scares here or there. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But I think the movie does a great job of doing more eerie type of horror, where it's not meant to be just jumping in your face with a bunch of loud noises. Rather, it's just really creepy imagery. And there's a lot of things involving kids here that is very gruesome and very brutal, and is definitely hard and uncomfortable to look at. but it's effective in being incredibly eerie and creepy. And as I mentioned before, the sound design is amazing, and that also includes the soundtrack, especially during the dream sequences. There is a couple of pieces of music in here that quite literally gave me the biggest goosebumps I've had in ages. Like it's so good, and it's the type of music that just makes you feel very immersed in the intensity of the scene. And it also kind of feels in a lot of ways like you're watching a classic horror film. And of course, like I said, these creepy dream sequences are kind of meant to make it feel a little bit more classic, and especially since the movie takes place in the 80s, it makes sense they would try to make the movie also feel like it comes from the 1980s. I mean, there's even an intro sequence to this movie, which a lot of movies don't do that nowadays, but there's a whole intro sequence that was so well done. Like, it was so creepy, but the imagery and the sound and everything, oh my god, I loved it. I love when movies do that, when they take place in the past, but they also make it feel like the movie comes from the past in other ways. And there's another thing they do that I'm not going to spoil because I thought it was really cool, but it was just such a nice touch, and you'll know what I'm talking about the second the movie starts. Now, when it comes to the story itself, they actually added a lot to the lore of the Grabber that I was very surprised by, and I actually thought it was pretty good. A lot of people will argue that it's kind of pointless, like we didn't need this sequel, and I understand that perspective for sure. We definitely don't need this movie, but I don't think we need a lot of movies. We didn't need Terminator 2, we didn't need Aliens. There's a lot of sequels you don't need, but you love that they exist because they're damn amazing. And this is kind of how I feel about this movie. I don't think we needed a sequel. I don't think we needed to add to the lore of this character, but I'm glad that they did because I actually thought it was quite interesting. And there's a lot of backstory elements that we didn't know about before that do add more context to the association of the Grabber with Gwen and Finn in this movie. Gwen and Finn also get a lot more story in this movie. Obviously, they are dealing with a lot after the first film. Finn especially, he is just not dealing with things well at all, and no one really expected him to, but I really like what they do with these two characters, their sibling bond, and a lot of the dialogue they have just feels like the type of conversations that two kids would have after going through something incredibly traumatic. They're both coping with it in very different ways, but they also had very different experiences with what happened in the first film. I will say, I think Gwen got more of a spotlight here than Finn did, which was kind of interesting because in the first film, Finn was obviously the main character and Gwen was a side character. She had a big role to play in that movie, but she wasn't the lead necessarily. Whereas in this one, I would say Gwen feels more like the lead and Finn feels more like the side character. And some people might not like that. And honestly, at a certain point in the film, I didn't like that. But then I thought to myself, it makes sense in the context of the movie with the story they're trying to tell here. And Finn does still get enough in the movie that it felt warranted. I wasn't really against this change, but it might feel weird for some that Gwen does kind of have more of a spotlight here, but the whole dream thing, the fact that that is tied to her, it makes sense why we're going to be seeing a lot more of her in this movie, and there's going to be a lot more built on her character. The film's also quite emotional. Like, I was not expecting it, but there's at least two moments that I was basically teary-eyed, and I don't usually expect that from horror films. I don't really think that happens that often. There's been a lot of movies that have made me cry before, but this is not one of them that I was expecting it to do it, but it kind of did. So that's something to think about, and I love it. I love when movies can make me do that, so I'm definitely not against it, but I wasn't expecting so much emotion from this movie, but it does have a lot to it, and it makes sense given the context of what these characters have been through and what they learn in this movie, because there's a lot more that we learn about, and it is very interesting and very messed up. Obviously, Ethan Hawke's performance as the Grabber is incredible. He is easily one of my favorite actors of all time, definitely in my top 20, and he was incredible in this movie. There are so many lines of dialogue from him that are like just amazing lines. Like, I know a lot of slasher characters tend to have their iconic lines that we all know and love. Chucky has a bunch, Freddy has a bunch. I guess Jason and Michael don't have any, but the ones that talk do. And I'm very glad that the Grabber is basically becoming an iconic slasher character at this point. It's always cool to see new slasher characters arise, and obviously now that there's a sequel, he's gonna get that status very soon. And there's so many great lines of dialogue in this movie that definitely solidify him as being quite iconic. And the last positive I have for this film is the fact that I am so glad there are quite a lot of side characters in this movie that actually do something. I always hate this thing in movies, and horror loves to do this more than any genre out there, where the side characters are useless. They're just so annoying. They're so pointless to even be there. They're always so just obnoxiously incompetent. And sometimes that's realistic. Sometimes it makes sense why you'd have some incompetency from certain people. That's understandable. But it was nice to have a movie where the side characters actually felt like they had a role to play in the story. They actually felt like they were doing something. And I love to see that. They all had their own personality. They all actually understood what was going on after a certain point, and they were helping. And it was so much better than the usual, like, you know, side characters just not believing the main characters and pretty much never believing them until they finally see it in the very end or whatever. It was nice to actually see side characters that had a role to play in the story a little bit more actively. And they were all really good too, so that was nice. But now let's get into the negatives, and honestly, I don't have many negatives. I really loved this movie, but there are two things I want to mention. So first of all, although I loved a lot of the story and I really enjoyed what they did show us, I do feel like we could have used a little more of the grabber actually like killing and terrorizing people, because when you actually look at this movie without actually spoiling anything, there's actually not a lot of him like attacking people, right? So a lot of it is the dream sequences, obviously Gwen with these different dream moments where she's learning new things, and obviously there's scary moments here or there. But when it comes to when he's actually present in the movie, he actually doesn't show up until pretty far into the film as well. But when he does show up, I feel like there needed to be a little bit more of that part where he is there and he is terrorizing the shit out of people, because that is, I feel like, the best part of this movie. There's a good like 30-minute chunk that is definitely the best part of the film, and I just want a little more of that, because again, without spoiling anything, I do think that part goes away a little too fast. And I think if we had even just like 10 more minutes of that, it would have been fantastic. 10 more minutes of, you know, different crazy sequences involving him attacking people, and maybe even more cool lines of dialogue. I don't know, just more of the grabber in general, because although I loved his role in this film, I do think in the end I felt we needed a little bit more of him, just a little bit more. And the last negative I have is one that I'm still kind of struggling to think if this is actually a negative or not for me, but it's the way I felt watching it. Maybe it's something that won't matter on the second watch. I do think some of the line delivery in this movie from some of the actors wasn't very good. A lot of it was amazing, don't get me wrong. Like, there's a lot of incredible acting, and that's the reason I'm not going to point out anyone in particular, because I don't think it was anyone in particular really. There was quite a lot of incredible acting across the board, but there's a couple of scenes with a couple different characters where I felt like, yeah, that wasn't the best delivery for that line. And I don't know if it was the dialogue or if it was the actual delivery from the actor, but it just felt like there was a couple scenes like that where I was like, yeah, they probably should have done a second take there and found a better, like, you know, delivery for that line. But again, it wasn't that often. It was maybe like 10% of the scenes, no, 5%. I don't know. It was definitely not a lot, but I felt like it was a little too frequent for me to start to think to myself, yeah, they probably could have fixed a couple of those scenes here or there to make the line delivery just a little bit better. Some of it felt a little inorganic, but most of it was honestly fine. I don't have like a big issue with that. Just wanted to point it out because it was something that irked me in a few different scenes. And I actually do have one more negative, but this one is more spoiler centric. So I'm going to do a little separate segment here talking about the spoiler. If you do not want to be spoiled on this, just skip over to the rating segment where we talk about the actual rating I'm going to give the film. It will be bookmarked and timestamped, so you can just skip over to it. But this negative is one that I couldn't say without spoiling it. So like I said, you know, if you haven't seen the movie, skip over this. And this is the fact that I feel like Gwen, with her ability, obviously she gets the ability to basically fight back in her dreams, which is obviously an element from A Nightmare on Elm Street, very present in Dream Warriors. They definitely took huge inspiration from Dream Warriors. But I feel like that part of it came on a little too fast. It felt like Gwen gained this ability to fight back just too soon. It kind of just came out of nowhere. She just thought to herself, oh, I can fight back. Oh, I can do this. And I feel like there should have been a bit of a build up to that. And kind of what I talked about before, how I wanted more of the grabber, like actually being a threat and terrorizing people. I think the reason that ended so fast is because she gained that ability so fast. So it felt like there was less moments where she was genuinely scared and running away from the grabber. because she learned that ability too soon. And if she took a little bit longer to figure that out, there would have been more scenes where she's actually being attacked by the grabber, which is exactly what I think we needed. I do like the idea of her having those abilities. I think that's an interesting thing. And like I said, it's something that was literally in A Nightmare on Elm Street itself. So it makes sense they're utilizing it here as well, because I mean, even her own dreams, I mean, you can do crazy shit in your dreams all the time. So it makes sense. But I just think it should have been something that she had to learn and she didn't really master right away. It felt like the second she realized she had it, she kind of just mastered it. She was just like a pro at it, and it felt a little bit too soon. And I feel like they kind of rushed into that. But overall, it wasn't the end of the world. I just feel like that would have helped the movie a lot if she didn't master that right away. And that's going to do it for the positives and the negatives. Overall, I really loved this movie. This was a fantastic sequel. And honestly, I think I might have liked it more than the first one, just by a little bit. I think the dream sequence stuff is just too good to not love. And even though I loved the first movie, I really, really loved this one as well. I'm going to give it a 9.5 out of 10. I don't know if I would quite give it the status of being one of the best movies of this year. It's definitely up there. It's definitely in my top 10. But I guess we'll have to wait and see, you know, at the end of the year if it's going to end up still being in my top 10. But right now, it's definitely in there because this was absolutely incredible. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. I will see you all in my next one. Peace out.